starting, dude. What?
I just got a notification that you started.
Oh, then why are you interrupting me? Jeez. What's up, gang? Thanks for joining the Undiplomatic Podcast show with undiplomatic takes about the foreign policy scene. I'm Van Jackson. I hope you're doing well. It's been a few days. I've been kind of unplugged a bit for the kind of holiday break. I was doing streaming like almost every day, and I have a day job where I do professor shit, so that's not super realistic, you know? And so right now I'm in this mode of trying to figure out how I distribute my labor across my extremely tight schedule. Things are a little today. I'm doing the normal 2 p.m. Eastern time block for this live stream, which is kind of like my ideal window. But when I start back teaching in a few weeks, that's going to throw a wrench in things. In one day, I have a book coming out, which is going to just monopolize the shit out of my time. The book, by the way, if you can't see it over the shoulder, The Rivalry Peril. Oh, yeah. The Rivalry Peril, how great power competition is horse shit and all that jazz. So that'll be great, but also a giant fucking time suck. So I don't know, with like podcasts and op-ed writings and all that stuff, there's going to be a lot of tax on my time. So I'm going to try to do this when I can, but the schedule might be a little unstable for the next little bit, and I have to apologize for that in advance. I'm the one who actually suffers for that because from what I understand of Twitch, like, you know, people get on Twitch, and if you're not there, they go watch somebody else. So that is what it is. To start off today, ton of stuff, as you can see in the ticker at the bottom, ton of stuff to talk about, especially because I've been, unplugged for a little bit. Although I did a variety episode with my co-hosts, Matt and Julia, last Friday. You can catch that. And some of what we talked about, it's up on YouTube. You can catch some of it. So actually, we're going to talk about a little bit of it today. But we're doing those. We're starting to do those on a weekly basis. So in addition to the live Twitch streams, we're going to have those. And that will be cool. So to start us off, I wanted to share a nice little musical number, not from fucking Alexander Hamilton guy, but from my man Bamboo Pistola. He's in the Bay Area. He's a Filipino rapper. Interestingly, he was an enlisted Marine, U.S. Marines, but he is a radical in the most radical sense. Like he's like I think maybe like a revolutionary. And you can get that from his lyrics. I've shared one of his songs before, but he's got another one that I just want to share a clip from to warm us up and maybe to get us in the appropriate vibe. So let's see here.
Why y'all so sad for? Let me get some of them liberal tears from my coffee. Hey, man, hey. Why y'all so worried, man? We built for this shit. This what we here for. I said you ain't gotta be afraid, but you can be concerned. Or you can fan the flame and watch this motherfucker burn. We are fireproof, the proof that there's a fire. The devil changes suits so our eyes get tired. The guy from outer space and the guy with orange face make it easy for the comrades to shake y'all asses awake. Are you awake?
Are you awake?
Are you awake?
You better wake your ass up.
Feel like I need to tell the youth not to be frightened, cause we've been here before. We have built the countermeasures dealing with the first four. This just means it's time to choose a side and get to work. Not for nothing, but I've been through presidencies that were worse, that did what Netanyahu doing now to Muslim citizens, indiscriminately bombing villages of children. And we did what y'all need to do and get y'all shit together. Look at how we did it, learn from it and do it better. You ain't gotta be afraid, but you can be concerned. Or you can fan the flame and watch this motherfucker burn. You ain't gotta be afraid, but you can be the spark. Or you can be the fire on the cloth on Molotov. I say you ain't gotta be afraid, but you can be concerned. Or you can fan the flame, watch this motherfucker burn. You ain't gotta be afraid, but you can be the spark. Or you can be the fire on the cloth on Molotov. What if...
Awesome. Awesome. Yep. So I felt like it was kind of a good reminder that the liberal tears thing was maybe a bit heavy-handed, but one of my mantras that my buddy Jairus Grove, he teaches at University of Hawaii in Honolulu. He said a few years ago during Trump 1.0, and I don't know if he got this from somewhere, but it was like, the end of the world is never the end of everything. And it's true that your end of the world may mean that you're not there anymore, but like there was some comfort in that. Like everything goes on, life goes on some level. And I think what Bamboo is talking about here, there's a bit of a version of that where it's like we need some equanimity, and the more kind of you're in that sort of liberal mode that you thought life was good and you thought American exceptionalism and like just you thought life was a certain type of way. And then the thing that is so jarring about Trump is that he throws all of that into question. He like reveals all of that to be a kind of farce. And that can be like, the more committed you are to that exceptionalist delusion that it was all good before, that you papered over a lot of exploitation and brutality and inhumanity and barbarism, like because you had lived in the world. And this was me too. Like, I'm not throwing shade at anybody, but like that, because you didn't recognize all of that going on within your world, Trump just comes out of nowhere and it's the biggest gut punch in the world. It's really, and that's it's radicalizing in a right-wing way when that happens to a liberal, if they don't seek or get political consciousness. So Bamboo, also like Olufemi Taiwo, he has said a couple times that like our ancestors did more and got more with much less, facing worse. So like they had worse, more horrific conditions to deal with, much more powerful opposition than we've got currently, and at the same time they had less than we have, and they got more than we've been getting. So there's a kind of like get to work mentality that's needed here. Like, you recognize that the civil rights, fucking abolition of slavery, the 40-hour work week, the National Labor Relations Act, like so many of the good things that we've managed to get, we got under conditions that made it feel impossible, and so like there can be good stuff on the other side of this, but we're gonna have to walk through some fire to get there. So relative, like keeping this absolute nightmare that we're facing, and it's an absolute fucking nightmare, and like every single thing, every topic that we have to talk about today highlights some aspect of the dystopia. And yet we've been here before, like Bamboo says. It could be worse. It has been worse. Yeah, our ancestors were traumatized. That's true. That's I'm not saying we want to like relive what our ancestors went through, but we can come out on the other side. It ain't the end of the world, right? So, anyways, that was a great warm up, a great aperitif. One thing, I realized that like most of the people who tune in and most of the people who follow me are not jujitsu bros, but you have to indulge me a little bit because I am. If you'll see, like, you can't really tell, but like I have a black eye right now. It's not super bad. And like when I look tired, it kind of looks like I'm half Asian. So, when I look sleepy half the time, even when I'm not. But I was training this weekend, and it was liberating. It was a fun time. It's what I do. It's one of my like sources of real freedom in this life. But I was reminded of it all when I saw that Joe Rogan, like twice in a week, he said that jujitsu is libertarian, or jujitsu will make you a libertarian. And one of the times it was in his conversation with Mark Zuckerberg like a week ago. So let me share that real quick because I just want to speak to this briefly.
Okay. Why? I might have to rethink this.
Yeah, there's a whole spectrum of people.
Yeah. What has it done in terms of one of the things that a lot of people have said, and I have too, like nothing turns you into a libertarian quicker than jiu-jitsu. I don't know why that is. I think it's the hard work thing. It's the cutting out all of the bullshit and realizing how much of the things that we take as real things are just excuses and bullshit and weakness. And just procrastinate. There's a lot of things that we have that exist, especially in like the business world and the corporate world and the education world, that are just bullshit. And they don't really have to be there. Mm-hmm. And they're only there to try to make up for hard work.
Yeah.
What a load of shit. So, hey, Fancy Philip Floppy in the chat. So obviously I don't necessarily agree with Joe Rogan. I'm not sharing that to share the love or whatever. But it made me think like they're actually, first of all, I don't think Joe Rogan has a coherent sense of what libertarianism is. And that should probably be obvious. But there is something about the jiu-jitsu culture, especially in America, where it intersects with a history of like patriarchy and racism and everyday violence, and like being surrounded by that. There is something about that where like libertarianism is kind of a reaction to that in some ways, even though libertarianism, and this is what's happening now, I think, in a way, libertarianism is also a pipeline to fucking MAGA, to fascism. A couple years ago, I wrote about bro culture in relation to the Capitol insurrection on January 6th. And my concern then was how like I've been in the jiu-jitsu and MMA like subculture for a long time, like on and off for 15 years, 16 years, 17 years, which gives you a hint about my fucking age now. But the jiu-jitsu scene, like it's been a bubble during Trump 1.0, especially. It was this bubble where people were starting to gravitate around Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan overlapped with Alex Jones, and Alex Jones was a like, bug eating monster conspiracy theorist, like false flag conspiracy, like the worst kind of conspiracy theorist, not even a harmless one. And all of that was like bubbling within the stew of like jiu-jitsu and MMA culture. And then you had Dana White, president of the UFC. He was like turning openly hard right, and then you have all of these like comedians doing sexual assault stuff, and they're in the larger Joe Rogan universe. And so they move to the right quickly, and like you see the convergence with anti-woke, like cancel culture obsessives, and then the trans athletes obsession, and like all of that stuff is like floating around. And Joe Rogan is the guy who's like platforming and giving voice to it and propagating it, but it's like ensconced largely within people who either train jiu-jitsu or MMA, or who they're like wannabes, and they sort of like to rub shoulders with it. They like it as the way that a lot of people watch the NFL or the NBA. Like they're not going to be those athletes, but they still sort of enjoy the proximity to the sport. You know what I mean? And so there's a lot of bros who actually don't train, but they love the proximity to the sport. I mean, like, look at the shirt I'm fucking wearing now, Kuzushi. That's off balancing, which is like something you do in jiu-jitsu in order to attack, like this is the culture, and the culture has it's not become right wing, but it has a lot of right wing content in it. And so that started out with a lot of people like Eddie Bravo and Joe Rogan not being right wing, but actually being libertarian. And I mean, a very loose libertarian, So that sort of pipeline to supporting Trump and fascism, basically, like that's a huge problem. It's a huge concern. And the thing that even the jiu-jitsu community is talking about right now is this Joe Rogan question. Like, does jiu-jitsu lend itself to libertarianism? And when you hear Rogan's comment there, he's saying like he's equating libertarianism with appreciation for hard work and struggle and cutting out the bullshit. And like, what does any of that have to do with libertarianism? Like, are you telling, like, the thing is, in America, jiu-jitsu can be libertarian, or jiu-jitsu, people who train jiu-jitsu might find libertarianism, but that has like nothing to do with the martial art itself. It has everything to do with the tribe, the community of your gym, the people that you listen to when you listen to podcasts and check in on like YouTube tutorials on jiu-jitsu and shit. Like all of that stuff is what has a political valence. Who you're around has a political valence. The culture of a gym is very like specific, and you go from one gym to the other, and they do things very differently, or they treat how they talk about stuff from outside the gym very differently. And so in America, I think it's probably true there are a lot of gyms that cultivate a libertarian ethos, because you need to eat healthy in the RFK Jr., conspiracy theory woo-woo sense. There's a lot of that. And that, I think, is a function of having a shit medical system. Like you can't rely on American healthcare for your own physical safety and betterment. And so you're trying to get information for yourself by yourself. And so you're getting it from your tribe, and then you go down these rabbit holes and you think ivermectin is the solution to COVID and all this stuff. So like, that's a pathway that a lot of American jiu-jitsu clubs have gone down. It's not like that everywhere though. And there's like, I think there's a very strong case to be made that jiu-jitsu, which has no inherent political valence, lends itself actually to socialism. It's you realize by training, like my back is killing me right now. My neck is super stiff. I told you I got the black eye. You realize that you get injuries, and then you depend on your healthcare system and you realize that your healthcare, even if you have like decent insurance, it's shit. Like they're not really taking care of you, you know? And so the training accumulates injuries inevitably, and the injuries shed a light on how much you actually need a social infrastructure, you know? And you cannot learn jujitsu by yourself. It's not really an individual sport. When you compete, it's you versus one other person. But in order to be worth a damn, you have to have a community of people that you work with. You know, it is truly communal. Evangelist in the chat. And so like, yeah, like there's a way in which jujitsu involves a lot of like social norms, reciprocity, consensualism. There's this guy who actually is a socialist, and he has a little network. He has like a podcast and a newsletter, and he has a gym, I think. And it's called Liberation Martial Arts. And he has this whole like socialist anti-imperial take on martial arts generally, not just jujitsu. And he thinks it's insane that so many martial arts sites have gone down this like right-wing rabbit hole. So he's obviously a huge critic of the Joe Rogan stuff. But his content makes like reinforces this belief I have that like you really do find community in jujitsu. The problem is the kind of community that you end up finding. And what's happened with the far right in America and with militias in America is that they recognize that like jujitsu spaces and MMA spaces have become a third place for bros, and they're using that to their advantage. And then they'll smuggle in reactionary political thought or fascism, you know, and like that bro culture incubates my 2020 take on all this was that the bro culture incubates fascism because it's training you for violence without purpose, you know. And when you start smuggling in the Joe Rogan thought on top of that, you know, and this belief that you're earning everything you get, it's like you're not earning shit on your own, you know. This is the equivalent of like the Elizabeth Warren, like you didn't build that. That's the same with your jujitsu skills and your fighting skills. You didn't build that. You know, you had to do a lot of hard work, yes, but you relied on a social infrastructure and a community. And when things went wrong, you needed all of that, you know. So like you're always building on what others can help provide, you know. Anyways, jiu-jitsu is not inherently political, but I think there's a source. It could be a site of liberation. It's also, this chat says, it's also the search for community and that inherent human desire for connection. 100%. You know, actually, I'll share you. I'm hurting pretty bad physically right now, and I'll show you one of the rolls that I had 2 days ago, which I'm still hurting from. It's just 2 minutes, and there's a narration in case it doesn't make any sense to you. All right, I'm rolling with a guy here who's he's bigger than me, he's stronger than me, and he had good top pressure. So I start out trying to get butterfly guard, nothing doing, so I switched to half guard. I've got the far side arm drag position, and then I switch to butterfly sweep, or I try to. It doesn't work. It's worth troubleshooting later why that didn't work. I was too far away, and I ended up with him on my back for a half second, but I was able to escape. I get to a half guard, and I've got an underhook on his leg, and I use this to do a coyote half guard, and I get up, and I'm able to sweep classic Lucas Leite style. Your underhook doesn't have to be on the waist, it can also be on the leg. And then I'm letting him cook for a while because I'm exhausted. So I'm just going north-south to knee ride to side control and switching back and forth. Finally, I get to set up a back take. I start to go into the truck, but he tries to bail before I can get it set up. And I had some grip, so I was able to just go to side control immediately. And then from here, I'm letting him cook a little more. but I'm trying to figure out what it is I can actually do to him that will work, because he has really good defenses for the most part, and so I don't want to go Keisagatami even though it's repeatedly available. And so I end up doing this shotgun armbar from side control, which is super powerful. You can't see it super well.
I almost broke his arm.
Video,
Not on purpose.
instructional thing.
It's just a tight
It's
armbar.
super strong. So now I'm gassed. Round 2, I'm just fucking around, trying an inverted guard. I don't get anywhere except a closed guard. And then this was my great setup though. As soon as he stands up, I hook the leg and I enter K-guard straight to a knee bar. Textbook. It all just went down exactly right. So slow motion again. I go into the keymaster position. I hook the leg. I frame on him. I use my frames to push away. I swing my leg over and I capture his knee line. And then I switch my grips to his ankle to pull the end of the lever, and his knee is gone. Not really, but it's just it worked well. Anyways, that was super freaking fun. And yeah, that's how I spend my time when I'm not streaming, reading, writing, teaching, whatever. So I can see how like you develop a sense of pride from grinding it out like that. And like clearly, like you saw the video, jiu-jitsu fucking works, bro. I'm like 175, 180 pounds somewhere. But I float back and forth between there. That dude was 240, you know, and I was feeling it. I can't believe you're actually making the BJJ content fit. Yeah, boy. I'm a synthesis of this shit, you know. I also to be totally honest too, like I'm never gonna be like a Rogan's sort of size or scale or any of that stuff, you know, and I'm not trying to be, but like I do feel like there needs to be alternatives, and there needs to be bro ass alternatives, because like I used to listen to him regularly, but it was for lack of alternatives, you know what I mean? So anyway, yet another episode where I find a way to bring in jujitsu. So, all to say, jujitsu is more socialist than libertarian, but it is not inherently political. It's really about where you train and who you train with. So, Evangelist wants to try it. Yeah, dude, it's cool. So the thing about jujitsu, as you saw in the video, like I'm elder millennial. I'm middle age. I hate saying middle aged because that scares me, but like I might count as middle aged. And my fitness level is like nowhere near the guys that I train with. That big dude is way fitter than me, way stronger than me. And you saw like I dominated him. I submitted him twice in like 5 minutes, you know. That's the jujitsu. That's not me being some amazing, you know, tough guy. It's I know shit. I know I have a skill that I learned through practice, and it works like a motherfucker. You know what I mean? And like I've been training for a long time, but you only need like 6 months of jujitsu to be able to deal with somebody in real life who doesn't know jujitsu. Like the rabbit hole that I've gone down is training to beat other people who know jujitsu. The times when I've come up into contact with people who don't know jujitsu, it's like a hot knife through butter. I can't describe the feeling of how easy it is to deal with somebody who doesn't know jujitsu with jujitsu. It's wild. That's why it became so popular. It became popular because it works. The UFC became famous because jujitsu dominated everything in the beginning. You know, the trouble is once you start facing other people that know jujitsu, they can nullify all of these advantages, and then the game becomes like, you know, jujitsu versus jujitsu, and so like it really becomes a chess match. So that's where I'm at now, but you don't need to go that deep in order to get benefit from it. Like just for sort of personal health, self-defense, all that stuff. It's amazing. And there are some people, if you get to the wrong gym especially, that get into it because like you can control a situation with jujitsu and you can decide how much to escalate or not, but you could also end up like dominating somebody. Like if you're into domination, you might seek out jujitsu as a way to dominate others. And it's possible that you run into those types. I feel like the sport weeds those people out though, because nobody dominates in the beginning and you have to eat shit for a long time before you can actually do anything to anybody. Like you have to get submitted 10,000 times, you know? And so if the reason you're into it is the domination, you're going to end up giving up because you're going to get dominated yourself over and over and over and over. And so you've got to like, you have to be willing to just, okay, the reality is that I'm going to lose all the time. And then how can I like have a positive mindset about this? It's kind of like living under capitalism. You know, I'm going to be exploited all the time. How can I have a positive mindset about this so that I can keep going and then make progress or whatever? Anyways, that's enough about jujitsu for now. There's what was I going to say? Oh, Trump, Gaza. There's several like Trump related things in here. It's unfortunate. Trump is going to like dominate foreign policy and politics conversations for the next little bit. But it is what it is. I just realized the chat overlay is not on. So, Trump has made like Biden was a war criminal. He facilitated a genocide unapologetically until the very end, right? Trump is doing the same so far, sort of, with lots of like caveats. You know, like he's unabashedly supporting Israel, but he's also the one who pressured Netanyahu into a ceasefire. And I just noticed in the chat, Buff Angela said on the topic of violence and community, I think a lot about Fight Club. I don't want to get derailed from the Gaza point, but like Fight Club was super important. It came out when I was in high school, which again dates me. It was super important to me at the time. I thought it was like this. I feel stupid because I rewatched it like a year ago and it didn't have the same resonance at all. But there was like a kind of class consciousness that was there, you know. It was clearly like working class, underclass people. At one point that, you know, when they like capture the police guy or whatever, and then they're like, we serve you your food, we take out your trash, we watch you while you sleep, you know. It was like this classic moment of working class power, and it went in an like a radical anarchist direction in the film. Obviously it made for a better story, and that's totally possible, but it starts as this like personal liberation journey, and then you realize you need a tribe, you realize you need organization, and then you're vulnerable to cults of personality along the way, of course. And depending on the culture, you could end up being, you know, anarchists doing violence, or you could end up in a cult, or you could end up socialists, you know, but you're going to end up something. So I don't know. I feel like Fight Club is not nearly the movie, not nearly as like right wing as our popular culture sort of thinks of it as. You know, it kind of got appropriated as right wing, kind of like The Matrix. Like The Matrix is a trans film, but there was a period of time where it got co-opted and represented as like a right-wing film, you know. And you talk to the directors, the Wachowskis, like they're very explicit. It was a trans movie. And it's weird how like art can be co-opted like that. But I think that was the same thing with Fight Club. Anyways, I was going to say this is not the movie podcast, except sometimes it is, because I do movies. So what I wanted to say on Trump and Gaza. So this motherfucker, he has proposed, Trump that is, he has proposed basically a kind of land grab foreign policy in many places, and Gaza and Israel's fucking genocide is no exception. Trump's solution is to turn genocide into ethnic cleansing, right? To convert it basically. And that, like, the way he wants to do that, let me see if I can share this here. The way he wants to do that is by proposing that Palestinians be evacuated from the Gaza Strip and transferred to Egypt and Jordan. Okay. So Trump wants to use the rest of the Middle East as resettlement so that Palestinian land can be reclaimed and developed by Israeli developers, and Trump firms. You know what I mean? And so there's this great thread on Twitter, and it's basically a statement from Hamas about all of this. And I have not seen this anywhere else, which is why I feel like it's important to at least read through it, right? So Hamas is obviously not having it. Trump wants to use Egypt and Jordan to do ethnic cleansing, to resettle Palestinians, to basically evacuate Gaza, so to dispossess them so that Gaza can become exploited land, right, for Israelis and for Trump firms once again. So this is Hamas's statement. The Palestinian people, who have stood steadfast in the face of the most heinous acts of a genocide in modern times carried out by the fascist Zionist occupation army, have refused to surrender to the crimes of forced displacement, particularly in the northern Gaza Strip. Our people categorically reject any plans for their expulsion and displacement from their land. We call on the U.S. administration to cease these proposals, which align with Israeli plans and directly contradict the rights and free will of our people. That's right. So Trump's plan is an Israeli plan, in essence. Instead, the U.S. should work towards empowering the Palestinian people to achieve their freedom, establish their independent state with Jerusalem as its capital, and exert pressure on the criminal occupation to expedite the reconstruction of what was destroyed during its brutal war on the Gaza Strip, restoring normal life to the area. We also call on Arab and Islamic countries, especially our brothers in Egypt and Jordan, to reaffirm their steadfast positions in rejecting displacement and expulsion. We urge them to provide all forms of support to our people, strengthen their resilience and steadfastness on their land, and work to remove the effects of the fascist aggression inflicted upon the Gaza Strip. So I'm not co-signing Hamas or anything like that, but it's pretty predictable that they're not going to fucking go for this. You know what I mean? And that means the war is going to continue. And what I'm trying to say is that even though we have this precarious ceasefire right now, and Netanyahu obviously doesn't even want the ceasefire, so he's looking for reasons to end it. We have Hamas. There's a way in which Trump's land grab ethnic cleansing plan is going to actually undermine the ceasefire, because the pipeline that Trump wants to create, and that maybe even Netanyahu would accept, is to go from genocide to ceasefire to ethnic cleansing, and then Israeli reparations, not Palestinian reparations, would take the form of expropriated Palestinian land, right? And that is some evil, fucked up shit. That's a horrible, horrible prospect, and that's what's developing as a proposal. That's what this is, right? But Hamas is going to be a spoiler to that. They're not going to go along with that, obviously. Egypt and Jordan, if they have a political consciousness, they're not going to go along with that, But that leaves us in this question of what comes after the ceasefire, and Trump is not the guy to be brokering peace on this. His peace is an ethnic cleansing peace. It's the peace that's actually violence, but re-narrated. So that is troubling, Anyways, I thought it was, I couldn't believe that like nobody else is sharing this like Hamas statement or like contextualizing the Trump proposal for what it is, which is obviously fucking ethnic cleansing. It's literally, this is what like the term ethnic cleansing came about for. It's like you're taking a people based on their ethnicity and you're being like, you ain't got to go home, but you can't stay here, And by the way, here is what they're claiming is their home. So you got to go. That's dispossession. That's expropriation. That's primitive accumulation, right? That's not even capitalist accumulation. That's something more primitive. And it will be leveraged for capitalist exploitation once it's taken. So, yes, I'm hoping Egypt and Jordan won't go for it, But this is the thing, like, Trump's going to try to sell a Middle East peace on the back of the Palestinians. That's what the Abraham Accords was in the first place. It was a way to claim that you were making peace between Israel and other Arab countries, but in a way that literally contained an isolated Palestine. It was a divide and conquer. And that's what this is too. This is a way they're holding out the carrot of, Egypt, Jordan, you can have great relations and lots of Uncle Sugar money from Israel and from the US, with Israel, with the US, but you're going to have to throw Palestinians under the bus. You're going to have to break inter-Arab solidarity, and you're going to have to look out for number one. You're going to have to take care of yourselves at the expense of others. And that's a terrifically terrible devil's bargain, obviously. But it's the bargain. That's precisely the way that like an imperialist peace works. You get a peace in one place by creating something much worse elsewhere. And that's pretty fucked. That's like, devil's whack-a-mole. Yeah, I don't know if that's the right metaphor. But yeah, Egypt is overloaded with refugees. So at a practical level, it's not clear to me why Egypt and Jordan would go along with this unless they had some bank shot theory of the case that like they needed stability with Israel and they needed American dollar bill, y'all, right? Although it's interesting that the U.S. has frozen all foreign assistance, all foreign aid, except to Israel right now. This is like an executive order. I think it's going to be temporary, which is why it's frozen. Like they're doing like a 90-day review of all foreign aid. And I think what they're going to end up doing, this is my prediction. I don't actually know for a fact, but they have a 90-day review period. And I think they're going to go like line by line through every foreign aid project and then ask like a MAGA question. Like, how does Trump Tower benefit from this? How does American power benefit from this? And those are basically the only two questions that matter. And if you can tell a story that relates a foreign aid line item, a foreign aid project to Trump Tower or American power, then that foreign aid will continue. You know what I mean? But for the time being, it's like there is no foreign aid on the table to be had, even for Egypt, even for Jordan, but that's a temporary thing. Yes, I predicted this shakedown for Taiwan a couple months ago. That's totally what's going to happen. Taiwan's totally going to have to eat it too. There's actually, I don't have a planned discussion of this, but there's a ton of like China shit in relation to the bowels of the Pentagon to talk about. I may have to do that in a subsequent. I'm not super prepared to talk about it right now, but like there's shit that's moving. And I do want to talk about the Pentagon in a way. So that might be a good segue. So Pete Hegseth, who's, the human embodiment of rape. He's, a monster. I don't need to bemoan that in so many ways. I've actually been very kind of like, I don't know if heartwarmed is the right word, but like I've been pleasantly surprised at how many national security bros are like very publicly rebuking Hegseth as a piece of shit. You know, like this guy sucks and let me count the ways. And a lot of it, interestingly, has to do with his DEI stuff. But this statement that I have up on the screen, this was the press release of Hegseth's statement upon becoming Secretary of Defense, SecDef. And I just want to read this out because I have a couple thoughts. I'm in the middle of writing a thing for the newsletter about this, so the more coherent version is going to be forthcoming. But let me just read through this real quick, and I have just like a couple brief points to say, but it ties into a discussion I had on the podcast last week with Matt and Julia. So he says, privilege of a lifetime, blah, blah, blah. We will put America first and we will never back down, which as a parenthetical, that's classic like 1980s action movie stuff. Like we will never back down. Who's wanting you to back down? What are you talking about, right? Anyways, he says, the president gave us a clear mission, peace through strength. And he says, we will do this in 3 ways. Peace through strength is very stupid and evil. And part of what I'm going to write about is this whole peace through strength nonsense. But it's also vacuous, like capacious. It could mean anything. So he says, we will do this peace through strength in 3 ways: by restoring the warrior ethos, rebuilding our military, and reestablishing deterrence. Right. And then he goes on to like break this stuff out. He says, we'll rebuild our military by matching threats to capabilities. That's an interesting phrase that is very problematic. And I'm going to talk about that more. He's very focused on calling Department of Defense employees and the military warriors, specifically warriors, not war fighters, warriors. And this is not something that like I'm very invested in the rhetoric of this shit, but the national security bros that who I still know and like I track, there's a community of these folks who are very upset about this notion that they are warriors. Like war is something that they feel like they have to do. They don't feel like it's like who they are. And so a war fighter is a person who has to fight a war from time to time. A warrior is a person who exists to fight wars. And I feel like, dude, if you're parsing that distinction, you've kind of lost the plot. But it's interesting that they're trying to draw lines at all, is what I'm saying. Like they reject it. And he says, matching threat to capabilities, rebuild the industrial base, reform acquisition process. That's not happening. Passing a financial audit. Pentagon's never done that. That's not happening. Rapidly fielding emerging technologies. That's already been happening. That's what the Biden administration did. Most lethal force in the world. Sounds like Kamala Harris. Reestablishing deterrence. This is the other thing, right? So he mentions deterring aggression in the Indo-Pacific by communist China, which is kind of predictable. He puts our enemies on notice, he says. It's just a bunch of bullshit. Like reestablish deterrence, rebuild the military. The military is a $1 trillion war machine that is spread across the world. Its power projection at a global scale, $1 trillion. You're going to rebuild it. The subtext in that of like the assumption in that, as in like we don't have a military, it's been destroyed. And so we're going to rebuild it, means that you have to take as the starting point that $1 trillion is 0. And then how do you build the military from there? And that's fucking bananas. I like what I've seen from like the Elbridge Colby types is that like they want, and some of the Air Force generals and stuff, they want a somewhere in the like 1.5 to 1.7 trillion dollar budget for the Pentagon. And even that is like it's not really enough for them to do their masturbatory fantasy war with China, like the way that they want to do it. Those guys, the Bridge Colbys and the generals, if they got a $1.5 trillion defense budget, which would be a 50% increase on $1 trillion defense budget, which is kind of like what we're looking at, right? They would still, to make it happen, need to cut a lot of other stuff. They would need to cut the value of Pentagon contracts. They would need to cut Army BCTs, right? Brigade combat teams. The Army would have to be like a bill payer, quote unquote, in order for the Air Force and the Navy. They'd have to stockpile missiles and 5th generation fighters and stuff. So like that's what's sort of coming. And they would have to draw down forces in places like Europe. And so there's this alchemy of how the China Uberhawks, the defense strategy warmongers, and the Trump administration, the Trump MAGA, national conservatives, the way that like they think politically and the way the defense warmongers think strategically, there's a way that this stuff converges. And so what you get on the other side of that alchemy, on the other side of, that's a mixed metaphor, but like what you get on the other side of that is like, you've got to draw down forces in Europe, right? And this is why NATO is a problem for them. I'm not a NATO fan. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a critic of NATO, but the NATO versus MAGA or NATO versus Trumpism or whatever, like it relates to not peace, not isolationism, not bringing the troops home. It relates to optimizing for war with China, right? And so it's not restraint, it's prioritization within primacy. It's not an alternative to primacy. It's doing primacy in a different way, where you're really focused on one specific version of World War III with China, right? Typically across the Taiwan Strait. So that's the shit. That's what they're up to. And to do that, the way that they want to do it, the way that the Bridge Colbys want to do it, the way that the Pentagon wants to do it, it's going to take probably like 1.5 trillion bucks. And even then, you're going to have to cut commissaries. You're going to have to cut base exchanges. You're going to have to cut, A-10s. You're going to have to cut, probably going to have to fucking cut aircraft carriers at some point, but you're definitely going to have to cut force posture in other parts of the world. And you're definitely going to have to cut the Army. So that I think is what is probably going to start taking shape. The thing I wanted to focus on this Hegseth statement, that was like a little bit of a tangent, actually. The thing that I really wanted to focus on here was the true mission of Hegseth. The only thing he mentions that has to do with the world in his statement to the Pentagon, the only thing is China. He mentions communist China. We're going to deter communist China, and we're going to destroy communist China if deterrence fails. Like, that's basically what he says in that statement, right? Other than that, he says nothing about the world, which is not surprising because he knows nothing about the world. But he does, like, I wanted to be like, I wanted us to be clear-eyed about what he's about and why he's there, because he's clearly not qualified for this. He's a loyalist, right? And so my theory of Pete Hegseth is that he has two missions, and they intersect with the Pentagon's existing missions, but they are not the same, right? His primary mission is war on DEI. Nobody doubts this. Everybody knows this. It's been his primary line of effort. His second mission is to support a civil war if it happens, or to be a coup enforcer if it happens, right? Trump learned from his first term in office that you cannot, you need the Pentagon on side if you're going to go full mask off, full dark side, full fascist. You need to have somebody at the Pentagon who's going to be a loyalist. So in the event that Trump needs to go down that monarchical tyranny path, he needs a yes man leading the Pentagon. Hegseth is that guy. So if that shit hits the fan, break glass, activate your loyalist. That's Hegseth's like contingent role. His primary role, as we know, is war on DEI. That primary mission, this is the thread that nobody is connecting. It requires great power competition. It requires making China evil and 10 feet tall. The reactionary political project of a white supremacist, patriarchal military requires focusing the Pentagon on lethality, right? To absurd levels, as if lethality isn't what the Pentagon has been focused on its entire existence, as if Kamala was not foremost committed to lethality. You know, this is about the white supremacist patriarchal military, the white nationalist military, right? This is why Hegseth wants to fire as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, because the guy is black. The guy is a warmonger, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. If you ask me, you know, I'm not defending the guy, but he's black. And that means that Hegseth wants to get rid of him. Because if lethality was all Hegseth cared about, he would want to keep the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You know what I mean? And so his real primary mission is the white nationalization, the patriarchalization of the military. And you see a lot of elements of that. I've read snippets from the book he wrote because, you know, it's one of these things like I read it so you don't have to. I didn't read it closely, but scanning through the e-copy, this is his obsession. And there's a bunch of dudes in the like national security intersection with MAGA world. There's a bunch of dudes who think that DEI is a Marxist project, which is fucking hilarious. It's like nothing. It's so anti-Marxist, you know, but they think it's a Marxist project to destroy America by destroying the Pentagon. And I really don't know if they actually believe that, because it's so insane that like it makes my brain explode. But whether they believe it or not, new stream title DEI BJJ. Whether they believe it or not, that's the mission. That's the main thing, is to like counter DEI. And by countering DEI, in order to counter DEI, they've got to have an object to direct lethality at. That object is called China. You know what I mean? And so this is, once again, I mean, look, this is why we wrote this book, the rivalry peril, dog. The whole point of this, there's a bunch of like layered arguments here, but like geopolitical rivalry, great power competition, it has a political valence. It tilts the terrain of politics in favor of the fascists, of those who are against democracy itself. And this is precisely what we mean. Countering DEI, if it's about making that sort of white nationalist patriarchy institution, well, how are you going to do it? You're going to do it on the back of China rivalry. You're going to do it because you have to have that excuse of China. If we keep DEI, we can't beat China, right? That's their insane fucking idiot galaxy brain logic, you know? Thank you for sharing the link in the chat. Booyah. Chat says, maybe a merely academic question, but should we welcome this critter brain rot because it weakens the US military? Or fear it because it makes it more evil? I don't know if we should like, you know, fear or welcome whatever. The entire debate, the reason I'm talking about this right now is that like the whole debate about DEI in the military and Hegseth, it's venerating, it's forcing Democrats once again to be the defenders of the establishment and to be institutionalists in a world, to be like defenders of the system in a world where the system is broken, which is inherently bad politics. This is how Kamala lost, you know? It's like, it's such smart politics on the part of like these mega fuckheads, you know? So I don't know that there's like, if you're on the left, are you going to defend? I mean, we had in the podcast on Friday, we talked about this. Like, it was a kind of open discussion. We didn't resolve it, but it's like, if you're on the left, do you defend DEI and make that your like your cause, even though DEI is like problematic because representational equality doesn't matter if the people who are doing the representing are just tokens, you know, or if their ideology is fucked up, you know, like you bring in a black person, but they don't bring a black perspective, or they don't bring a working class perspective, then what are you doing? You know, you're diversity washing ongoing militarism, ongoing primacy, you know, an ongoing ruling class project. That's no fucking good. At the same time, you don't want a ruling class at all, but an all-white ruling class or an all-male ruling class is pretty horrific, arguably worse, you know? So if you're an accelerationist, I can see an upside where you're like, well, this is just the barbarism on display. Like, they can't wear their liberal mask anymore. And I get that logic. But I'm not an accelerationist. So I feel like it's bad, you know. I mentioned Femi Taiwo earlier in the pod today. His view, which I think I tend to share, is that these symbols or sites of like institutionalized corporate capture of identity politics, you know, DEI is one version of that. They're bullshit in a way, but they're also a sign of progress. And they're a foothold for more progress. Because if you make people agree, even corporations, to commit to a kind of equality, the logical conclusion of that, if you take it seriously, is other forms of equality. You know, so the solution is not to get rid of the ambition of equality. It's to push libs to take that commitment to its logical conclusion, to put a materialist backbone on it, right? To make democracy not just symbolic, but actual material, economic, you know? So it's in that way that I'm like, I don't want to, like, I'm not a fan of like roasting or getting rid of DEI, but I also think it's a losing cause politically to make it the object that you spend all your time defending. It's just like with trans athletes. Like, that's not, it shouldn't be monopolizing our discourse. You know, you can have a position on it. You can have smart politics about it. If you're spending more than 5 minutes on it, you've lost, you know? So, what's the chat say here? Oh, people have been talking about Hobbes and Leviathan the last 18 months. I missed that. Chat says, look at the blob. Many more women these days in foreign policy analysis, but they're excruciatingly mainstream liberal hawks because being a woman in a critique is... You know what? Holy shit. I have to share this, okay? Maybe you saw this, maybe you didn't, but this was a clip of our discussion on DEI from Friday. And it totally bears on all of this in ways that I did not anticipate. So let me just share this real quick. I'm on a couple like national security listservs, like where it's national security bros up and down, and they share morbid, hawkish, bizarro, warmongery shit, and with the best of intentions. And so like, I don't engage. It's just like I'm on these lists from like a previous life, you know? There was a bunch of women on these things who are like national security bro women, and they are freaking the fuck out about the anti-DEI turn, the firing of the Coast Guard admiral, the appointment of Hegseth, like staffers afraid to be in the room with him, which when you're SecDef, that kind of situation comes up a lot. Like, and afraid for their jobs even, and like some of the national security bro reactions to their sharing of fears is like, well, if a woman is afraid of the climate, then maybe she shouldn't have a security clearance. And it's like, oh my God, dude, we're fucked.
But it's also like, girl, you didn't see that coming? I don't understand.
The national security space does not actually lend itself to representational equality in the way that we have tried to achieve it the past decade or so. And like, yes, you even on a good day, you end up with the rainbow bombs problem, you know? But like, that is actually like a historical anomaly. And I think it was an anomaly, the rainbow bombs thing, like getting the rainbow part of that was a product of a unique historical moment where it was like neoliberal globalization requires, you know, racial and gender blindness. It requires activating women for the labor force and this kind of thing. But it's a knuckle dragging culture. It's the violence industry, you know?
Well, it's just very like white women feminism, right? That you're going to advance the like feminist project.
Julia has the same critique as Chat.
And I have really mixed feelings about this because on the one hand, it's like Trump, I mean, I'm pretty sure he repealed the EO for equal opportunity employment. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I did see that headline. That concerns me, obviously. I think that that's a problem, and I do think that like we need some kind of like systemic approaches to increase diversity, especially at the highest levels of power and government. On the other hand, like I personally, in the way that I navigate my personal and professional life, like care much more about your values and principles and how well you live those out than I do about like who you are demographically. And part of that is because of these like, I don't want to name names, but like because of these like, wow, I'm really going to allude to it, but like national security women's like professional groups where, you know, the
lady bros,
like lady bros. It's like you actually realize you don't have that much in common with these women, except for like maybe you both want to have policy careers, and that's not that compelling, right? So it's kind of like the same thing around like, you know, it's not about like the rich versus the poor. It's about like capital versus workers' rights and empowerment and like the ability to live a life of dignity. And it's the same thing in my mind with like representation. Like I want substantive representation, not superficial representation.
Right. Not to cut Matt off, but that was my point. You know, it's like that was extremely well said, and I there's nobody in a better position than Julia to throw shade at the national security lady bros. You know, these people who want to put, you know, pink lipstick and stilettos on a fucking thermonuclear weapon and call it a day. You know, like they think they're advancing the cause of feminism because they put a woman's face on global primacy and fucking inter-imperial rivalry. Like that's going to do us a fat lot of good when we have World War III and nuclear Armageddon. Fucking thanks, you know? So that's a joke, but this is the conversation around like DEI, feminism, and the Pentagon that ought to be happening. And it's not the conversation that anybody is having. It's more about freakouts or the personalization of Hegseth as a sexual assaulter guy. You know, what are his personal indiscretions? How has he failed as a human being on some level? And it's like, motherfucker, we got bigger problems. He is an expression. Same with Trump. These guys are expressions of larger problems at a system level, at a structural level. You know, we got to like not take our eye off the ball. So on diplomaticpodcast.com, baby. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So the national security lady bros, that's a problem. Just because they're ladies doesn't mean they're not bros. So that's that. let me see here. Oh, you know what else I wanted to talk about briefly? This there's a piece in the National Interest about Russia's economy. It is weirdly smart, good. Um, the National Interest as a publication, for people who don't know, is like it it would be a nothing burger publication that nobody knows, except that that's where Francis Fukuyama first published his essay about the end of history. And that, of course, was huge. And it's kind of like a conservative realist magazine, and it's fallen on hard times in recent years. They went through a period in the like Trump Biden era where the quality of it really dropped down. They were involved in some scandals. I'm not even sure that I would call it like right wing in an overt sense, in a partisan sense, but it's definitely got a conservative lean to it. And if above all, it is realist. And the thing is that realism often skews toward the right. And I say all of that because like I've written for the National Interest in a previous life. I do not co-sign it. But they have interesting stuff from time to time, you know, so interesting that I've written for them also. So this piece, it's written by a guy who's like a capitalist of some kind, right? Founder and CEO of Alpha Centauri. So again, I don't even know what the fuck that is. I'm not co-signing that shit either. What I want to focus on here is the way that they talk about Russia's economy, which is being driven into the ground, you know. So he rehashes some history of Putin. When he initially took power, he was trying to fix the Russian economy, which was, you know, absolutely shit. He inherited a bad situation. He inherited hyperinflation in the 90s, right? So Putin dealt with that partly by a flat tax, right? He established a bunch of sovereign wealth funds. He created reserves, right? He started asserting more centralized control over the economy. You know, he exploited the shit, obviously, out of oil and gas exports. It never really went beyond that because of all of the fucking kleptocracy, right? Yeah, just because I share shit doesn't mean I co-sign it. But so like the Russian economy never developed. Like excessive concentrations of capital, right? The extraction of surplus value from workers and from natural resources, that was never put to productive use to build alternative sources of capital accumulation or to like, you know, redistribute to the people. None of that ever happened because it was creating oligarchs. It was going into the pockets of oligarchs. And then those oligarchs brought it into, you know, New York and London real estate, basically, and then called it a day. And so that has led to like the stagnation in Russia's economy, a lack of dynamism, a lack of innovation, right? And then since the war, and obviously a brain drain, you know, Russia's best and brightest, a lot of times they fled. Everybody knows that, right? But since the war, you know, sanctions have hurt, but the economy has become wholly dependent on, yes, oil and gas exports, but also on it's become a war economy. And this is not sustainable. You know, first of all, oil and gas as the source of your national income is not sustainable because we're going to transition at some point, right? Or you'll deplete your own resources eventually. So over a long enough time period, you can't just depend on extraction. You got to fucking do something else, right? But a war economy is even more unsustainable because you cannot, as America has shown, you cannot do forever wars without destroying your own state, you know? And so this is what I thought was smart about this piece. It talks about Russia and like kind of like Putin's theory of political economy, and it relies on this vision basically that's the Eurasian Economic Union, the EEU. And so the idea is Eurasia itself, right? So Central Asia, Eastern Europe to some extent. These are territories. They might have people on them. They might be pre-existing nation states, but these are territories that have various forms of resources that can be extracted and exploited in order to enrich the metropole that is Russia, or more narrowly Moscow, right? And so the way Putin thinks about the economy is that the war economy will actually help realize this greater Eurasian Economic Union project. Well, what does that sound like to you? Is that not imperialism? You know? And so this is the great connection here, right? The imperialism is the political economy that Putin seeks. And the problem with that is it means expansion and conquest. And to a large extent, this primarily actually is not about NATO countries. So like, this is not an argument for NATO to exist forever and ever. It's not an argument for NATO to expand. Like, this is an argument about oligarchy at a certain point requiring imperialism, which is a kind of universal, that's the pipeline. And so this is what we need to be sensitive to. And the fact that Russia's economy has become a permanent war economy, which is not sustainable, means that his only exit, short of Russia becoming a failed state with nuclear weapons, which would be the end of us, like, short of that happening, the only exit off of this permanent war economy shit is this imperial path, right? And that's horrific in its own right. We're not supposed to do I am an anti-imperialist. That's what we ought to be resisting above all. You know what I mean? So this is a fucking problem. And bringing all this to light is why I kind of appreciated this piece, right? So he says at the end, let me see if I can find the quote here. Putin continues to trumpet the EEU as a major economic center in a multipolar world. This reflects a broader problem with Putin's mentality. Throughout his quarter century in power, Putin has evolved from technocrat and fiscal reformer to national conservative, and finally to neo-imperial gatherer of Russian lands. Okay, does that not sound familiar? From technocrat and reformer, that's like neoliberalism, to national conservative, which is the ideology of the existing like MAGA shit. Literally, national conservatives is the intellectual movement around Trump, to imperial land grabism. Panama Canal, Greenland, fucking Canada. You know what I mean? So this is a general pattern. This is a general structure. As it is in Putin and Russia, so it is in America. And that ain't because Putin's telling Trump what to do, or whatever fantasy people have about that. Timothy Snyder, I'm sure you're watching. It's got everything to do with like political economy. Like, this is the pathway, dude. The national conservatives get political power in order to facilitate, because they've got backing by oligarchs, in order to facilitate oligarchic wealth accumulation. And at a certain point, that requires shaking the couch cushions of the world to extract what they can. Because in order to be oligarchs in the first place, they don't use surplus capital smartly for more investment in innovation or in a better labor force, right? They invest it myopically, stupidly. They do financial speculation with it, And so because they don't even use their own surpluses intelligently or in an enlightened way, they end up requiring imperialism, right? So all of this ends with imperialism. We're in a world of inter-imperial rivalries, which is, ironically enough, the origin of international relations as a field of study in the first place. So there we go. What do we got here? Yeah, Buffangelus is scary because Silicon Valley gassed everyone up to justifying needing billions, and then they did it with less than 6. Oh, DeepSeek. Yeah. DeepSeek. So the thing that OpenAI, not the firm, but OpenAI, DeepSeek is OpenAI, right? Like the reason DeepSeek is significant is because it is not on the basis of IP hoarding and monopoly capital. It's not this like firewall of nationalization of control and centralization. It's open model, right? Open source AI, and it's outperforming ChatGPT. But guess what? A fucking child outperforms ChatGPT. That's not so. It's impressive by the standards of what people think AI should be able to has been able to do. It's not impressive by the standards of like actually replacing our economy, you know? And so like I think AI is like way overhyped. I think it's a tulip craze. I don't think it's capable of doing what people think. And I think VCs are way overinvested, like way overinvested in AI. And my concern, I'm working on a book kind of about this, TBD. But one of my concerns is that like the Max Reed episode that I did where I interviewed Max Reed, we had a conversation about like the new defense industrial cartel in Silicon Valley, you know? If you haven't heard that, you should go back because it was a great episode. That was like a week ago, 2 weeks ago. But one of the things I mentioned to him in that episode was that AI is basically a sector of the economy that is facing overproduction because it's not profitable. But we're talking about like $500 billion of private investment into this sector, a not profitable sector, right? Even if AI starts performing at the level of like what we would, that it would replace our jobs and destroy the economy, which would be I think that's what a lot of like Mark Andreessen types are actually trying to make happen, you know, revolutionize the economy in a way that makes us all surplus labor, right? Makes us easily expendable, gets rid of us. Which is like world catastrophic. But to get there, AI has to perform at a certain level. The problem is, even if AI performs at that level needed, how are you going to make money from it? There's no way to make it profitable, right? You still have to figure out how to extract surplus value. And you're only going to extract so much surplus value if the value you're getting is automation, basically like eliminating the labor costs. That only does so much. And so my concern is that the way this becomes profitable, this AI grift tulip craze becomes profitable, is by selling it to the national security state, because they're run by a bunch of fucking idiots who don't know anything and who chase fads. And so it's like the AIization of war. And that's what's happening right fucking now. And this is like a profound and very dark alternative future. And it fits the facts of what's been happening. And so this is the thesis that I'm trying to develop and trying to make happen into a book, but it's going to take a while, you know. But yeah, the AI arms race stuff, like the AI competition with China, I don't know. I mean, like, I know America ain't going to win that. And that's what I think that's what everybody's focused on DeepSeek for, because it's like, holy shit, China did it. And they did it without the sort of, you know, monopoly secret squirrel, you know, information hoarding way. And that's like, they're doing it in the opposite way of the American model of how we've been going about this as like national security bros, you know? So it's like really undermining the American national security project in a way, you know, and I don't know how the U.S. security state will react to that, but that's not a bad thing, you know? So I don't know. I'm not sure what else needs to be said about this. Chat says I should get in touch with Jacob Dymek. Oh, he actually, so he subscribes to my newsletter. He's like, he's from Poland or something, I think. He subscribes to my newsletter, and we actually, he interviewed me for something he did. And I think he used the interview as like for his podcast, but like it was in Polish or whatever. I didn't share it with my audience because it was not in English. Although my portion of it obviously was. But yeah, it was actually, that was like maybe 4 months ago, 5 months ago. It was a great conversation. So he was very good to talk to. What do we got? Oh, the other thing I wanted to talk about today was well, there's a couple things. One of the big things was about monopoly capitalism, and I want to show this clip. More Perfect Union has this very short video that gets to this question of like, why are the tech billionaires lined up with Trump? Like, why are they falling over themselves to ingratiate themselves with Trump, fly their freak flags as fucking fascists? Like they went hard right so fast. What gives? Well, follow the fucking money, right? This is where More Perfect Union's thing comes in. Let me put this on here.
Tech billionaires were front and center at Donald Trump's inauguration. Former friend Ron DeSantis, who made the mistake of challenging Trump in the primary, got stuck in the overflow room. Message received. But what's the message to tech billionaires? On the surface, it looks like a reward for tech execs donating money to the inauguration fund. But the actual reason is even more concerning. We're actually watching an elaborate and delicate quid pro quo in real time, with extremely high stakes.
We are set to go to trial against Facebook this spring, against Amazon in fall of 2026. Of course, they would want a sweetheart deal, and I hope future enforcers wouldn't give them that.
The federal government is currently suing most of these executives' companies in huge cases that are still ongoing. They're trying to convince Trump to cut them some slack. Another part is...
Okay, so first of all, do you see, like, we all know that like Mark Zuckerberg owns Facebook and then used its monopoly its overwhelming dominant position in social media to then buy out other competitors and kill them, including Instagram, which was too profitable to kill. So it basically bought its rival. So imagine you're the hegemon and you see a rising power, and then you just, instead of fighting the rising power, you buy the rising power and turn it into you. You make the rising power and you, the hegemon, the same thing. You co-constitute each other. That's what Zuckerberg did with Instagram. And Instagram is better and more profitable now than fucking Facebook, you know? But that's monopoly capitalism, and that's technically illegal. You know, America is super corrupt, but this is what antitrust enforcement laws are for. And so the federal government is suing to make this happen, to break up. This is one version of like break up big tech, right? And they're doing this partly through lawsuits, and that is the opposite. That goes again, like Mark Zuckerberg would be brought low very quickly if he had to lose Instagram, you know?
Playing along with Trump to make tech regulation a conversation entirely about censorship, content moderation, and the freedom to say offensive things, rather than about...
Yes, so like all this fucking focus on the Nazi salute. My theory is like anybody who spends time talking about the Nazi salute is an unwitting pawn in these big tech bros game, because they have monetary financial it's not that there's the right wing shit's not a problem, but it's like it's not new. Like, we know fucking Elon Musk is fash, you know? That's not a surprise. We know Mark Zuckerberg will kiss the ass of any right winger if they have power. That's not surprising, you know? But the focus on like content moderation and shit obscures the fact that like the federal government, which Trump is now in charge of, has basically a ton of coercive leverage over these firms. And so the relationship that the firms have to Trump could make or break them.
Breaking up these corporate monopolies and protecting consumers from exploitation. These guys have good reason to fear the continuation of the status quo. The FTC sued Meta last year, seeking to break up its social media empire by forcing it to sell Instagram and WhatsApp. That case goes to trial in April. The FTC also has a case against Amazon over tricking people into Prime memberships. The DOJ took Google to court over its search monopoly and won last August. They launched another case targeting Google's grip on digital advertising. They went after Apple for trapping users in its ecosystem. A new administration is potentially a godsend for these tech execs, but they won't get a reprieve without cutting a deal.
It's like so literally like if these firms from Twitter to Facebook to Instagram to Amazon and Google, there's billions of dollars at stake for them in whether the Trump administration views them favorably or adversarially, whether it follows through on the various federal lawsuits or whether it drops them or comes to some kind of quid pro quo compromise, right? And this is why they are turning so hard right.
Americans all over the political spectrum are disturbed by the way big tech has fought dirty against regulators. For that reason, among others, Trump has made some noises about continuing to be tough on these companies. But recent developments also indicate that Trump has an off-ramp for them. Andrew Ferguson, Trump's choice for Khan's replacement at the FTC, is saying he'll scale back some of the antitrust stuff and focus more on censorship of right-wing speech, a pet project of Trump's. He presented this vision at Mar-a-Lago, and Trump rewarded him by describing him this way. Zuckerberg is already playing along, with Meta ending its fact-checking program to combat censorship and moving content moderation from blue state California to red state Texas. The arrangement is this: tech execs will kiss the ring, and if they do it well enough, maybe Trump's regulators will back off. Meanwhile, tech companies will make a big show of addressing conservative concerns about content moderation, so Trump looks like he's bringing them to heel. They'll perform submission on culture war issues, while questions about their economic power fade into the background. The end result could be exactly the kind of sweetheart deal Khan was warning about.
Well played, more perfect union. Well played. Yeah. So you've heard me talk many times about the bumper sticker version is, you know, ethno-nationalists and oligarchs need each other. And I feel like I've explained the part about the ethno-nationalists, right? Like the ethno-nationalists, they need financial resources in order to bankroll their politics, right? Ethno-nationalists don't have a mass base or like a popular mass base. They do have some grassroots though, right? It's not the majority. Like, you're not going to have a majoritarian ethno-nationalism, right? But there will be a mass base there. I guess that would be the way to say it. But what about the oligarchs? Why do they need the ethno-nationalists, right? Well, they need the ethno-nationalists because if you're a good liberal, you're not going to align with the oligarchs, although more billionaires supported Kamala than supported Trump. So maybe even quote unquote good liberals are down with oligarchy, which raises some interesting questions. But I mean, sorry, that was like a jab. The oligarchs need the ethno-nationalists because the ethno-nationalists do the public policy and the legislation that the oligarchs want. They do it at the expense of the people, you know, but that's the bargain. And so that's why they need each other. So monopoly capital, in order to keep being monopoly capital, which is how they stay rich and fancy, that requires being reactionary. It requires that coalition, the alignment there. And so that's like in a very real, direct material sense, stopping antitrust. Antitrust is an existential threat to the tech firms, to the billionaires. And that's a good thing, except that it's also the thing that makes them want to partner with the ethnonationalists, because the ethnonationalists can turn off antitrust and they can facilitate the continuation of monopoly capital. And that's how all this shit fits together. And that's why all the billionaires were on that stage with Trump. Those specific billionaires, because remember, Kamala has her own billionaires who are not the tech bros. The tech bro billionaires are the ones who make money by monopoly capital. And they're the ones who are specifically threatened by antitrust. And that's why Zuckerberg has a fucking gold chain on and looks like a douchebag, right? That's why. That's what all of this is about. So, what else? The one thing, this is, I guess it was a few days ago, January 24th. So yeah, 4 days ago, 3 days ago, Trump gave remarks virtually at the fucking World Economic Forum, Davos. This might be too much information, but I was like really good friends with a guy who ended up becoming the World Economic Forum's like Silicon Valley chief or whatever. Like they set up an office in Silicon Valley, and like he was the head of it, and back in the day being like 10, 12 years ago, this was like a very new thing, innovative. Also, it was before times, so withhold your judgment. But at that time, we all recognized that Davos was like ground zero for plutocracy and mapping out the world. And it was like the place, even back then, we understood like, okay, Davos is the place where the World Economic Forum, they meet to figure out what the story is going to be that allows plutocracy to keep existing. How do we preserve these absurd, extreme concentrations of capital in a world that's falling to shit, seemingly because we have hoarded so much capital? And so like, we need to narrate our way out of this corner that we've found ourselves in, right? That's what they're trying to do. That's what they're always trying to do. It takes different forms. Let's talk about polarization. Let's talk about the environment, the climate crisis. Let's talk about identity politics and DEI, and let's talk about all this shit. But ultimately, they know that the extreme wealth hoarding is something that they want to continue doing, but they also know that it has had ripple effects, real consequences for the rest of the world. And the only way that they can like reconcile those two things is through storytelling. Fourth Industrial Revolution, the rise of authoritarianism, the jungle grows back. What about the whales? Climate crisis. Yeah, like this is what they're groping for. And so they have to convene everybody, and they have to convene influencers and journalists. These motherfuckers, they don't invite me, obviously. But they have to convene these people in order to come up with what that narrative is going to be. It's a process to sort of figure that out, so that's what's going on. It's like, ideological construction to justify existing distributions of wealth. Right? Which is why they don't ever talk about shit like taxes and stuff. Anyway, World Economic Forum, they had Trump, of course, zoom in or whatever. And I'm not going to play the whole, I was going to like hate watch and do a reaction thing with Trump's speech, but it was like too insane. Every word of his speech was a lie or a distortion of reality in some way. And like, it would have taken, it was a 30-minute speech. It would have taken 50 hours to get through it. Like impossible to sort of like critique every line of the thing. And this is the world we live in, because like nobody really critiqued his speech. Like his speech at Davos got a lot of press, but there was very little challenging of him just doing like pure gaslighting. And it's like this is kind of concerning, because we're in this world now, especially post Gaza, where it's like we just expect that the president's going to fucking lie to us all the time, and he's got the biggest microphone of anybody in the world, besides Joe Rogan. That's a fucking problem. So anyways, what I want to show is a very brief part at the end of Trump's speech. He did a Q&A with some like panelists on the stage, and he was asked something about China, and I just want to speak to it real quick here.
You know that most consequential relationship in the world is between the US and China. US 28% of the global economy, China close to 20. That's almost half of the global GDP. And we know that you called President Xi Jinping last Friday. We heard that you had a good discussion. How do you see the relationship between the US and China in the next 4 years under your leadership?
He called me, but I see it very good. I think that we're going to have a very good relationship. All we want is fairness. We just want a level playing field. We don't want to take advantage. We've been having massive deficits with China. Biden allowed it to get out of hand. He's $1.1 trillion deficit. It's ridiculous. And it's just an unfair relationship. And we have to make it just fair. We don't have to make it phenomenal. We have to make it a fair relationship. Right now, it's not a fair relationship. The deficit is massive, as it is with other countries, a lot of Asian countries, actually. But we have deficits that are very big, and we can't keep doing that. So we're not going to keep doing that. But I like President Xi very much. I've always liked him. We always had a very good relationship. It was very strained with COVID coming out of Wuhan. Obviously, that strained it. I'm sure it strained it with a lot of people, but that strained our relationship. But we always had a great relationship, I would say, and we look forward to doing very well with China and getting along with China. Hopefully, China can help us stop the war with, in particular, Russia, Ukraine. They have a great deal of power over that situation.
It's not quite to the part that I wanted to get to yet, but I just wanted to flag. You can tell tonally that this is like so different from Biden era. And it's even different kind of than like Trump 1.0, and maybe this has to do with Elon Musk's business in Tesla, and Elon's in his ear or something. Like it's possible that that's what's going on. But Trump is positioning himself as a kind of conditional dove on China. And he thinks that China can sort of help facilitate an end to the war with Ukraine, getting a ceasefire with Russia somehow. He thinks that he's basically attributing previous turbulence with China, which he was like the major instigator of in Trump 1.0. Like, but he's now reframing all of that as like, well, it was down to Wuhan. It was down to the COVID, even though most of that animosity predates COVID, and great power competition that he like sort of co-signed under his administration, like that predates fucking COVID. You know what I mean? But anyways, it's all a way to sort of change the narrative. And he's talking in a collaborative G2 great power détente peaceful way. This is the thing in my theory of world peace, my theory of like an actual just global order. It requires these two great powers to have détente. The question is on what foundation? What are the terms of it? An imperialist détente is not going to work. Maybe as like a half measure. And this is part of what the Rivalry Peril book, it's part of what that's about. figuring that shit out, right? But let me keep finishing this here.
And we'll work with them. And I mentioned that with during our phone conversation with President Xi, and hopefully we could work together and get that stopped. We'd like to see denuclearization. In fact, with President Putin,
we'd like to see denuclearization. What he means is like nuclear disarmament. That's what I wanted to get to. Chat says, would Elon be fucked without the EV tariffs? This is a complicated question, actually. So I have a piece that's about to come out in Foreign Affairs. And it's a very compromised piece. Like, I had to write in a language of like, you know, states and shit that I'm not comfortable doing anymore. But it's like the price of entry to write in Foreign Affairs, and I needed to advertise the fucking book, and I needed to smuggle in anti-imperialist arguments into a mainstream journal. So you have to sort of decide when the compromise is worth it, and this was a time when it was worth it. So, but in that piece that's about to drop, I have one line in it. I think it's coming out in like 1 day or 2 days, but I have a line where I say that Elon's Tesla business in China actually benefits from this world of antagonistic nationalisms in the form of America's EV tariffs. And the editor was like challenging me on that. And he was like, he wanted me to explain it. Like, what do you mean? And in trying to explain it, I realized that it's like, it kind of cuts both ways. So like American tariffs on EVs, it keeps Chinese EVs out of the US market, right? And who benefits most from that? Well, the people who do sell EVs in the US market. Who sells the most EVs in the US market? Fucking Tesla, right? And so it's in this way that the EV tariffs benefit Elon. And also, Europe has adopted tariffs on Chinese EVs to emulate America. So America's tariffs have caused Europe's tariffs in effect. And Europe's tariffs have carved out an exemption for any EVs that are made by Tesla from China. And so Elon's tariffs that he pays to sell his Teslas into the EU market, it's less than half of the tariffs for any other Chinese EVs. So again, Tesla ends up benefiting from the EV tariff regime overall. If you remove the tariffs, I don't know if he would be fucked or not, is the thing. And that's the complication. Like, I think he'd be fucked at the current price point because Teslas don't justify their extremely high price. When I've seen, like, there are BYDs, the Chinese EV in New Zealand, they look pretty fucking awesome. They're great. And they are not expensive. Like, they're barely more than the car I currently have, you know? If I am gonna upgrade, like, I would probably upgrade to that. And like, that's a sign of things. It's like, these are more affordable and they are just as good, if not better. They're pretty sexy compared to like a Tesla, you know? So at the current price point, I think Tesla would be fucked in a world without EV tariffs. But maybe they can reduce costs by, you know, just squeezing labor more and more, you know, including labor in China. Like, so who knows? So I don't know if you would be fucked, I guess, is the short answer, but it's a very complicated thing. It's a good question. We are in Lib and Commie chats. All right. Oh yeah. So back to this whole Trump calls denuclearization, disarmament, denuclearization, but
Putin prior to an election result, which was frankly ridiculous. We were talking about denuclearization of our two countries, and China would have come along. China has a much smaller right now nuclear armament than us, or field than us, but they're going to be catching it at some point over the next 4 or 5 years. And I will tell you that President Putin really liked the idea of cutting way back on nuclear. And I think the rest of the world, we would have gotten them to follow. And China would have come along too. China also liked it. Tremendous amounts of money are being spent on nuclear. And the destructive capability is something that we don't even want to talk about today because you don't want to hear it. It's too depressing. So we want to see if we can denuclearize, and I think that's very possible. And I can tell you that President Putin wanted to do it. He and I wanted to do it. We had a good conversation with China. They would have been involved, and that would have been an unbelievable thing for the planet.
So that is an amazing, amazing statement, an amazing rhetorical marker that if it became even remotely real, would transform the world. That would be worthy of a Nobel Peace Prize, possibly. And I think that is something Trump truly wants. And that is an area where, like, maybe we ought to be encouraging Trump's better angels, because holy shit, the logic of what he was saying it in a very incompetent kind of way, but the basic logic of nuclear disarmament is fairly unassailable. And this is, and like the way he expressed it was, of course, fucking weird, but our nuclear arsenal far outstrips China's, right? Qualitatively, it outstrips Russia's. Quantitatively, not so much. But if Trump's relationship with Putin were able to lead to nuclear reductions, that would be just generally a good thing, especially because Russia, with this permanent war economy, there is a version of the future where Russia just fucking crashes. The world cannot afford to have Russia crash while holding on to the world's largest nuclear stockpile, And so, like, getting reductions is very important. And with China, it's one of the major sources of the security dilemma in Sino-US relations in East Asia. Like, the rivalry itself, like the nuclear modernization that both sides are engaged in, is basically arms racing. And China will catch up to us if we keep playing this game. While we have an advantage, there's a very strong incentive for us to try and get cuts to our nuclear arsenals as much as possible. The issue, the difficulty, because, like, Fancy Philip Floppy is a skeptic, of course. The issue is that the skeptics are right to be skeptical. If we're going to cut our nuclear arsenal, we would see evidence of that in the defense budget. Right now, the defense budget has line items in it that fund $1.7 to $1.9 trillion in nuclear modernization over 30 years. Every single defense budget, every single resolution in lieu of the defense budget, it still has this funding for nuclear modernization. And the Congressional Defense Industrial Complex is a real thing, and it has incentives to keep funding this. And Russia and China are not going to, the smaller powers or the weaker powers in the nuclear balance are not going to reduce their stockpiles or reduce their investments in these weapons if America doesn't also, or if America doesn't first, And so the ability to, like, credibly reduce nuclear arsenals depends on America doing things that America is not set up to do. So as a rhetorical marker, it's great that Trump is putting this out there, and we should be encouraging the nuclear dove pathway that Trump wants. But I don't see how this comes about. Realistically, this is Trump versus the machine, Trump versus the new establishment, which is still a bunch of primacist elites, imperialism. It's an imperialist foreign policy. Imperialists don't like taking L's. They don't like making concessions unless they're forced to, and frankly, Trump is unique. Like, you don't hear JD Vance saying any of this stuff, and Trump is old as fuck and unhealthy, and he's not going to live much longer. So when Trump is off the scene, it's going to be back to the like pure fascists. Trump's idiosyncrasies have a little something to offer, but that's at best temporary. The question of how you like credibly restrain nuclear arsenals, it can be done, but like the Trump administration is just like not the administration to do it, what's the chat say about this? Yeah. I mean, we actually make in the concluding chapter of the Rivalry Peril book, we make some recommendations for how to unfuck the rivalry. And some of that, it's not nuclear disarmament that unfucks it, but like credibly signaling in the direction of nuclear disarmament. Because everybody says the nuclear revolution thing. Everybody says like nuclear wars cannot be won and must never be fought. That's not a credible statement if you just keep doing nuclear arms racing. You know what I mean? So if you can credibly make that statement, put a down payment on that shit, that's progress. That's something to like have his successors inherit, assuming we still have elections in the future, So like that's making that down payment toward nuclear disarmament, even if it's just small shit on the margins, can actually be extremely transformative to global order, because it's a crucial piece of the puzzle for a larger great power détente, which is needed to unlock a lot of other issues, So the world is going to hell under various imperialist foreign policies. But if there are little areas where we might be able to make marginal progress, like maybe that's worth doing, Nuclear modernization crap is one of the easiest things to argue to normies to cut, in my experience. Yes, like normies, like normal human beings, they don't like a lot of them don't realize that we're spending a bunch of their money on nuclear arms racing. And like to the extent they find out, they're usually opposed to it. I've seen polls on this. Also, there's like focus groups that I've seen about this. Like nuclear modernization is like it's not popular. It's a fucking grift. But separate from that, like normies as in like establishment liberals, those guys are like kind of supportive of it, like the whole Washington foreign policy scene is the reason why we have this $1.7 trillion nuclear nightmare, John Bolton was the driving force for the last 2 decades. John Bolton, motherfucker. Ken Booth, critical studies scholar. Yeah, I have one of his books on my shelf over there. That's kind of what I'm doing. Like I've become a champion of something that I'm calling critical strategic studies or strategic peace studies. Just like 2 different ways of branding the same thing. But it's like critical security studies was like Ken Booth's wheelhouse, where he was trying to take critical theory, critical ways of analyzing international relations, and then trying to develop that further. But the further development part never really happened. Like the policy part of that fell off somehow. So like there's all kinds of good insights about the security dilemma and like restraining military primacy and centering the people who are harmed by policy, all this stuff, right? Geopolitics as the sort of, benefiting the violence doers in society and all of this stuff. But then like, how do you translate that into an actual program of statecraft, like policy, right? And that's where I came from. And so like and strategic studies has always been focused on that hard policy stuff, the like literally how do you pull the lever differently, or how do you pull a different lever than what we've been pulling, that kind of shit. That's what was missing before. That's what strategic studies fixates on. And so my thing was like, we need to bridge these things to make a comeback. Don't call it a comeback. So like a critical perspective and a critical analysis that has a program attached to it. So what do we do now? Like program literally attached to it. And I was calling it critical strategic studies. I don't know if it's going to catch on because there are no resources for it. And like, I personally am not an empire builder guy, like I hate management and organizations. I hate chasing grants and all that stuff you would need to do, like the nuts and bolts of empire building when you're trying to like create a new field of knowledge and that kind of shit. It's like maybe too ambitious, but like it's there on the table. Critical strategic studies or strategic peace studies, because peace studies is focused on making peace through in the world and an analysis for how to make peace, but it's often missing the like doing it at the strategic level or the level of statecraft, again, the policy relevance thing. So I don't know how you want to brand this, but like that's kind of the orientation of all my scholarship now, including like the rivalry peril. Like that's where it fits. And I'm basically creating in my mind, I'm creating my own subfield or something, but who would also want to be in this? I don't know. Critical. Just reading chat here. Lots of good jokes. I've struggled to overcome the gap between the world we want and how we get there. Yes. I mean, that's why like I think I have only nice things to say about Ken Booth. You know what I mean? Like his scholarship, and I've learned a lot from it. But the frustration was always like, all right, so the system is bullshit. Everyone's lying to us, mainstream IR theory is like for the ruling class. Now what do we do? That's the hard part. And that's what a lot of like left activism and peace activism is focused on. But unfortunately, the activist circles don't operate with like robust theories of how the world works, Say there's some do, some don't. It's a hit and miss. But like, and so like bridging that gap is the project, that's what basically like in the podcast and the live streams on some level is kind of an extension of that, because like I have no shortage of, and I'm not the only one, no shortage of ideas for what specific levers to pull, how to toggle policy, how to configure our choices differently at a very sort of boring mechanical level. I can do it. I know the spreadsheets, you know what I mean? And there are others like me, but there's not a lot of others like me, because to have gotten that level of insight, you had to spend time inside the beast, and that usually transforms you in a very right-wing kind of way. Then you come out and you're an American exceptionalist and a primacist. It almost happened to me. It kind of did happen to me for a while, right? I've got the blog empire. Yeah. I do have the blog empire. Yeah. I mean, my greatest ambition would be to basically like expand the newsletter and expand the podcast to be like a much bigger universe, and to have curriculum and tutorials for thinking critically and like infotainment, and attaching that to a policy program that progressive think tanks in Washington would then sell to Capitol Hill and then use and like staff in presidential administrations. That's my kind of like my most optimistic theory of change for how all of this shit relates to other stuff, you know. And then if we can fit jujitsu somewhere in there, that would be good. But yeah, one thing I've thought about calling this is like critical grand strategy, because it is grand strategic, it is world making, you know, but it's world making for the majority. That was my grand strategies of the left book. It was like, it's world making. All these left foreign policy ideas are trying to make a better world for all, not for the ruling class, not for one section of capital or some shit, you know. Flop Donkey, I appreciate you. Yeah. I enjoy I'm gonna keep doing the live streams. Like I get a lot out of it, and it actually forces me to like think on my feet about stuff that I've marinated in for a long time in writing and research, you know? And so like there is a kind of dialectic there, or well, yeah, dialectic, fuck it. I'll just own it. Yeah. And I'm like, a bunch of you guys who end up seeing this either like live on Twitch or who end up catching it later on YouTube, like I'm looking at the numbers, which are growing, which is good. But like these are this is a different audience than what I'm already capturing in the newsletter. And so like, and what I'm probably reaching with some of the like Washington shit that I do. So it's like there's a bunch of different pots of audiences, and like the live stream audience and the YouTube audience is its own distinct audience. Maybe some of you will get on the newsletter. I sure hope so, since it's the main way to subscribe and support undiplomatic.com. Although you can be a subscriber to my Twitch channel. I'm an affiliate now. But yeah, like this. So I'm going to keep doing this stuff because I'm like reaching whoever you guys are specifically right now, you know? And if I wasn't doing this, I have no idea if I'd be reaching you. But my schedule is a huge constraint. So like once I'm back into teaching in a few weeks, I think the live stream is going to be either like once a week or maybe twice a week. And then I'll be doing the Matt and Julia variety show once a week. And I'm trying to convince them to do that live stream also. But I don't know. It's an ambitious thing to do what I'm doing here. I think some of you guys know, because you guys are streamers, like this is not like an easy thing. It's kind of a skill set to be able to vamp and like hold an audience in real time, you know, and to just kind of keep it going and to try and make points while chat is blowing up, which is its own fucking thing. Like, I don't know how Hassan Piker fucking does that shit, you know? But yeah, so like it's its own beast, the live streaming. Just because you can do podcasting does not mean that you can do live streaming, or at least there's a learning curve. So I'm hoping to get Matt and Julia on the live stream at some point. But for now, those are like pre-records, and that's once a week. So that's sort of the schedule. Yes. If you really know what you're talking about, I'm just reading chat again here. If you know your subject matter, you don't have to hide behind jargon. If you really understand what you think you understand, you can speak plainly and explain things simply enough. And that is, to be an explainer is kind of its own skill too on some level. But that's something I've had to cultivate. And like, I'm really glad that I started the podcast years ago now, because I've gotten in a lot of reps in packaging and sound. By Twitter in its own way has probably helped me with this, but like packaging the core of what you're trying to say in something very pithy and in something that is going to communicate it to an audience that maybe doesn't have the vocabulary or the grammar that your subject matter requires. That's the task. And any kind of public intellectual has to take up that challenge. That's the main challenge, you know? On some level, it's like being a fucking rapper. Like, your first job is to hold their attention. fuck, 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 tits, dick, fuck, 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 right? The second the second job is to make use of the attention that you've captured. All right, I said fuck 50 times. Now here's how the ruling class is fucking you with World War III. You know? So it's like that to me is what like infotainment is supposed to be about. And that's what teaching is. That's what I do. None of you guys have been in my lectures, I imagine. You're not former students, but that's how I treat the lectures too. I even do the fuck, fuck, fuck to some extent. But it's like you hold their attention so that you can communicate a point to them, you know, and that's the art form. That's what we're doing. Whoa. Bufangela says they fell into a Jordan Peterson hole 5 years ago. Dude, so a couple of my jujitsu bros, including one who was actually on The Ultimate Fighter, the season with Brock Lesnar and Junior Dos Santos. For like real UFC heads, you'll remember that season. But he was on The Ultimate Fighter and he won his first fight in the house by triangle choke. And he was really good. He used to beat the shit out of me. But he ended up losing his second fight. He lost his career basically because he got a detached retina in that second fight. He was like just slugging it out with the guy. And doctors said he could never fight again. Why am I talking about him? Oh, because this dude, really nice guy and college educated, you know, he went to a better school than I did for undergrad. But he ended up becoming a kind of MAGA head. And I didn't see it coming at the time because he was like a super nice guy, super helpful. But his pipeline was Jordan Peterson. He found that fucking 12 Simple Rules book. He watched a bunch of lectures online, and when he went to college, this is the thing. If you major in STEM in college, you know, like if you're a science guy or a tech guy, or if you're learning finance or some shit, basically, if you go and have the university experience without the humanities, you don't even know it, but you're craving the humanities. And if you don't get a proper education in it, you're very vulnerable to people outside of university or outside of like, you know, respectable knowledge making. I don't know what you want to call it, but like you're prone to gravitate toward people like Jordan Peterson who are selling this shit, you know? And because they're filling a gap, you know, the neoliberalization of the university told us all to do STEM. It set the humanities on fire. It was like, fuck the humanities. And now that we have this big humanities gap, you get the grifters who move in and try to sell a stupid bro-y version of the humanities where we all eat meat and nothing else, you know? And that's the Jordan Peterson move, you know? And what he does, the way that he's compelling is the same way that a normal good professor is compelling. When I see Jordan Peterson, I see a guy who has disturbing right-wing views, but he's just communicating in the way that a normal good lecturer would. You're trying to reach your audience. You're trying to make simple points. You know, you have a kind of profound sense of the universe and you're trying to communicate that, you know. Yes, you have biases. You're also trying to like rationalize your biases. You're trying to introduce your biases to your students in a way that lets them know and gives them the tools to kind of judge for themselves. But if you're like a subpar scholar or a professor or teacher, you don't really give them the tools to think for themselves. You just tell them, this is how it is, this is how it is, this is how it is. And that's the Jordan Peterson thing, you know? So he's one of these guys who's a beneficiary of this, you know, the destruction of the university system, the setting on fire, the humanities. And it catches a lot of people because I think ultimately all of us have some craving for political theory. We wouldn't call it that necessarily, but like political theory, philosophy, love of knowledge. How should we relate to our fellows in the world? You know, these are profound questions. Yeah. Yeah, there is definitely room for progressive peace online forum. That's, you know, I'm affiliated with Security in Context and then with Center for International Policy. And both of these places have great potential. They do great analysis, and they're doing God's work in terms of like fighting militarism and trying to propose ways of relating to the world where America doesn't have to be primacist and imperialist, and where we can like kind of make peace, make equality, make democracy through doing foreign policy differently, you know? And so that's why I gravitate to these two organizations, Security in Context and Center for International Policy. But there's a lot of room for expansion and growth in both of these places in terms of like online forums, reaching young people, reaching people where they're at, which is in the fucking gamer community, right? That's literally why I started doing this. You know, it's not an accident, that I'm here, but it's also not an accident that I'm the only IR scholar who's here, you know? So yeah. Yeah. Yes. I have I hope all of you, of course, subscribe to the newsletter and pay for it because it's labor. Labor should be compensated, right? That's the world I live in, you know? But also, the newsletter didn't start with a paywall. It became something I needed to justify doing it because it takes up so much time, you know, and I have a day job. So to justify the time, it has to literally pay off on some level. But initially that wasn't the main motive for the paywall. It was like the paywall lets me keep track of who's seeing it, who are my enemies. And I want my enemies to be able, the people who pay because they like it, that's the ideal. But when my enemies are reading my shit, I want to know about it and I want to make them pay for the privilege. And so the paywall was really about making the enemies pay, but it would also became a mechanism to support, to patronize, literally to give patronage to this newsletter and kind of provide a community. But there's no shortage of free shit, you know, like probably 70% of the newsletter is unpaywalled, is free. The Undiplomatic podcast itself is free. The live streams are free. So if you can pay, there's ways to pay. If you cannot pay, there's still a ton of comment room. There's still a lot of, you know, like literally like in the chat, there's still a ton of room for engagement. There's still a ton of content that you can get, but you just wouldn't be able to get everything, you know, labor ought to be compensated. Anyways. Man, I appreciate a lot of this stuff. Y'all are awesome. I think Buffangelist was my first Twitch subscriber when I became an affiliate. And the other Twitch people, Twitch streamers have like little bells and whistles that go off on their streams when this shit goes down. I haven't figured out how to do that yet. I'm still, you know, the Twitch channel is growing fast, but I'm still a bit of a noob. All right. Well, this was fun as hell. I think I'm going to try to raid somebody. Let's see here. Can I do it? Gonna raid the Surfs TV, maybe, if it'll work. Appreciate you, Buffangelist.
and all of them.